It's LSU Bama week. It's week 10 of the high school playoffs. We're waiting on some brackets. It's election day. There's a storm coming. There's way too much happening just all around. But I'm excited to take a break from some of that and have an episode of Louisiana vs. Y'all's Recruit Dat Boot with Sam Spiegelman. What's up, man?
I'm surviving for all those things. There's a lot of things going on. I think it's November 5th. We're taping, and it's a month until state championships for high school. It's just a little bit. It's a month until National Signing Day tomorrow, and then all the fun stuff with college football playoffs and finding out who the president is and what the heck is going to happen next, Jarrett.
Yeah, it felt, as I started listing things, it felt like Dumb and Dumber, like our pets' heads are falling off. It's just too much. I know you and I were talking about it earlier. We're both exhausted just trying to keep up with everything. As hectic as the first week of November always is, it's always LSU Bama. It's always the end of the LHSA season. We're always waiting on playoff brackets. When you start adding all these other elements into it, it's a bit much. But we had talked about, with it being this time of year and starting to look toward the playoffs, that we're going to take an opportunity to look at some of the top potential player of the year candidates. And obviously how the playoffs go will have some weight in this and shift some things over the next, month and a half. But we'll get into, for the bulk of this episode, talking about some of these guys that have caught our attention for sure. And we may miss some folks. So if people are watching this and want to throw out a guy's name and some stats, especially, make sure to give people their due. But before we get into all that, it's been a kind of newsy couple of days in terms of some developments on the high school level, as well as some developments on the recruiting trail. And I guess first, let's talk about this U-High thing. It caught everybody's attention, certainly, as the rumors started to build up over the last week, and then the news official on Monday. But U-High currently is an 0-9 football team, despite us having watched 7 wins on the field over the last 2 months. What was your reaction as you saw this news for the Cubs with the playoffs again right around the corner?
Well, you talked about what time of the year it is, and that means it's big games on the high school football season schedule. And we had talked about you being sick last week, and that also happens when you're on the road and covering all these games. And we were talking, hey, after Madison Prep beat U-High, are they going to possibly push for number 1 in the classification? And I'm as me thinking about my trip in December, I'm thinking there's a very good shot I'm going to get a chance to see U-High in the Dome, and we actually haven't seen U-High in the Dome in some time. And now it's completely, there's a shot that they don't even make the playoffs. It's enormously deflating because obviously they're a talent-laden squad and you love the different opportunities selfishly to see players like Lamar Brown. They're obviously deeper than just that, and Zay Martin and seniors getting their opportunity, but a chance for evaluation and a chance for them to play in big games. It's always a fun. We always talk about the importance of state championship. Well, if you want to get an idea of who won the top performers in the state championship last year, look at Trades Green and then Aiden Anding. And those are 2 guys that are, one's making plays in Baton Rouge, and the other is, we're going to talk about, is one of these MVP candidates for their squads. So it's really unfortunate for U-High as a program. We know a lot of those guys over there as coaches, as well as players and moms and dads and uncles and stuff. So it's really deflating for the reasons why. You understand the LHA is strict, and they don't really take much. They don't give you much slack, and they'll hit you where it hurts. We've seen it time and time again. But overall, to repeat myself, deflating. But I get it.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we've talked about it previously, and I don't remember why this came up on a previous episode, but any of these rulings are always going to suck in some fashion or form, and there's always going to be some level of necessity in some fashion or form as well. I mean, there are rules in place, and they're there for a reason, and a lot of them, when it comes down to eligibility dynamics, are because a lot of schools around the state want rules to be enforced a certain way. It's just tough. You and I both know Andy Martin pretty well through the years, and I have a difficult time imagining that they did a whole lot, from the top down, that they were they were trying to do anything wrong. It seems like something, potentially slipped through the cracks or whatever, just kind of hearing from some folks over there. And so they're going to try and appeal this. But at the end of the day, I think where you and I continually come back to is, a senior class like Keelan Moses and Zay Martin and all those guys that have been itching to get back to the Dome for the first time. They won a state championship when those guys were freshmen, but that was out at Cajun Field. And so they've been
Right.
looking forward to this opportunity. And now not knowing whether or not they may get, the chance at it at all when it's really something that's been out of their control is always just tough to watch and monitor. The same way, we've talked about some of these other recent situations in recent years.
Yeah. Hopefully I think, we went to our rankings calculator, Jarrett Roser, who said that there was still a shot that they could crack the playoffs, and hopefully that works out for them. And hopefully, coach, like you said, Coach Martin, I stand behind him, all the time. He's a great coach since he took over that program. It was already on top, and he's maintained it, and he's done so with a whole different cast of coaches and a whole different leadership style, and they haven't really skipped a beat. So I'm hoping that maybe that appeal works out, and if not, they can play their way into the championships or into the playoffs rather, and let the talent take it from there.
Yeah, watching how this week goes will be interesting. They, looking at the Go Preps power ratings update, they were sitting at 27 when 24 teams get into the playoffs. And obviously, when you look at where some of those teams and their seasons are, and the reason why U High is so close still to that bubble is the fact that a lot of those teams, a couple spots ahead of them, are teams that are going to be heavy underdogs probably in their games later this week, whereas the Cubs will be a heavy favorite. And so there's a lot that could shake up there. You mentioned the appeals process. We'll watch how that all plays out. But end of the day, I know none of those higher seeds want to have to see U High early in the playoffs. Pardon me, if it does shake out that way. And so we've seen instances of that happening in the past where Carr gets dropped down, or Easton, or Acadiana, who went on and won a state championship, is like a 22 seed, I believe it was at one point. And so that'll be something that'll be under a lot of eyes and ears over the next week, all over the state, not just folks in Baton Rouge. But we mentioned a couple recruiting updates as well, and we'll kind of take them one at a time, talking about, let's go with, up north, Sunday night, 2026 wide receiver, Kenny Darby, who's one of the most recent interviews on the Louisiana vs. All Y'all channel right now. He'd been committed to Mississippi State since the very beginning of June, backs off of that pledge, reopens his recruiting process. He's a guy that is leading the state with over 1,300 yards right now through 9 games and 20 touchdowns for that prolific Vikings offense. I don't know that, watching the way the Mississippi State season's gone and watching the way Kenny's season's gone, that either one of us is real surprised to see him back on the market at this point. But Miami immediately offers Monday night. He'll be at LSU this weekend. Where do you kind of view things standing for Kenny? Still a lot of time for him to make a decision, and probably a lot of offers still on the way.
Ole Miss also put an offer on the table amid this breakout junior season at Airline. This is what happened. He made an early commitment to Jeff Lebby and that high octane Mississippi State offense that he expected to see. And, when you have a season like he's having, we're talking about potential MVPs for their respective classifications. And Kenny is right in the mix, and he was going to be someone we brought up. That's what happens when you're leading the state in receiving as a junior. It's really unfortunate, for seniors when they're in this position, and sometimes scholarships don't always open up in November. But when you do this as a junior, they talk about the importance of their junior season. This is why he's catching the eyes of the flagship university in the state. He's catching the eyes of Ole Miss and Miami, and offers are contagious. He's not only getting these offers now to come visit, and so coaches can get an in-person look at him. He's going to get invitations back for junior days and to go work out for a lot of these staffs. And, an offer from Ole Miss often turns into an offer from LSU, and that might turn into an offer from Texas A&M and Texas and Alabama. But either way, the SEC train is out there. The ACC train is out there. He's been absolutely incredible this season. He is able to separate. He makes contested catches. And, just kind of the ability to make plays not only downfield, but at different levels of the different layers of the field has been so transparent for them. They have so many weapons on that Airline high school offense. Again, I guess like not everyone can make it to the Dome, but I want to see that offense in the dome. They're gonna, they're gonna put up 50. Like, who can stop them? So, not surprising to see him open things up. Probably a long ways to go in this recruitment before it's said and done.
Yeah, and I've always wondered for him. I'm not going to put him necessarily in the category of, throughout the last year viewing it as a when on LSU rather than an if, but LSU has seemed to factor in there pretty heavily for him. He's a guy that grew up in Shreveport watching LSU from afar. We talked and he said he remembers turning on the TV then this is again one of those moments where we're going to feel old. He turned on the TV as a young guy and watched Jamar and Jets and those guys, and it was really appealing to him as a young pass catcher growing up. He's a guy that's been to LSU a few times, including camp this summer where we had a chance to see him. And so knowing the relationship that's there, the foundation there with Coach Hankton, I think it's going to be interesting to watch certainly the Tigers and how they play things with him in a class that I think they're going to, go after a few receivers and like him as much as almost anybody in state right now. And so watching how it develops will be fun. You mentioned, for him, he's got a long time. And so there's a little bit more opportunity, particularly in modern recruiting, where so much happens so early. Once you get to this point, it's kind of tough for guys to find homes late in a lot of cases. Another guy who had to reopen his recruitment this week, a guy that we've talked about several times on the show, Joshua Lewis, the defensive end from Dutchtown, a guy that we both like quite a bit. He backed off of that pledge from Missouri, and now he's got potentially a month, or if he wants to push it into the spring, he can, but looks like he'll be trying to figure some things out here pretty quickly. Houston and Tulane were his other finalists when he made that announcement in April, and I think those are probably two of the tops to watch still. What else are you hearing on Josh?
Yeah, I'd also throw Ole Miss into that boat as well. Joshua's had a fantastic senior season. Dutchtown is a team that's going to be playing in the playoffs and the chance to make some noise. The Fighting Dylan Sampsons, but I'm honestly very surprised. I think this was a mutual parting of ways, but a little bit more of Missouri. Kind of, this is what happens with out-of-state commitments. And we've seen it with LSU. We've seen it with schools all across the country. Missouri is going to have a ton of players returning next year after injuries to their defensive line, and I think that's opened the door up for Josh, who schools have continued to recruit him. He's having a fantastic senior season playing off the edge for Dutchtown. He's been such a playmaker. He's got such a fantastic quick first step. He really can accelerate to the ball. He's a fantastic tackler. Could also, I think, potentially play with his hand on the dirt as well. But he's done a little bit of both, and I think he's still going to end up at a good spot for him to continue to develop. And I think the biggest knock on him is maybe that he's just about 6'2.5", 6'3", maybe not a full 6'4", but a senior in high school, if he grows another half inch, he's a ball player. And that's been the theme for all these defensive linemen in the state of Louisiana. None of them are really imposing 6'5", 6'4" Don McKinleys. But you got a little bit of 6'2.5", 6'3" ballers from, places like Dutchtown and Lutcher. I guess it's just the river parishes.
There's not a lot of Dom McKinleys walking through those doors every year.
Big facts.
In general.
Or Gabe Relaford, for that matter.
Yeah, but it's going to be interesting. And actually, Josh and I are scheduled to talk tonight and kind of update on where some things stand for him. If folks want to check out that video on the Louisiana vs. All Y'all channel. But he's someone that he and DK Mays, who's out there at Houston as a member of their class, they've been really close throughout their recruiting process, taking pictures at all of these stops along the way. And obviously the opportunity to potentially stay close to home has to be appealing with the way Tulane's playing right now. It'll be really interesting to watch. He's becomes one of, there you go. Nice. And we're actually both in Tulane colors right now. He becomes one of the biggest available biggest available fish in this class in Louisiana now to watch over this next month or so. And so we'll certainly be watching him pretty closely. Another notable name over the last week off the market that I wanted to talk about is Kyrie Paul. Absolutely electric playmaker for Estruma. He's a guy that we've seen as a running back, as a receiver, as a DB, as a return specialist. I think he was up for all state consideration across the board last year in 4A. Guys like him and and Diesel Solari were just trying to find spots for him anywhere on that team because of the versatility that they bring. He commits to Southeastern Louisiana last week. I believe it was last Tuesday. He announced his commitment. A guy that had some FBS offers. Louisiana Tech was in on him pretty early, but I mean, just another example of in modern recruiting, an opportunity for one of these FCS schools in Louisiana to hit big.
Yeah, happy to see it for Kyrie. I've had a lot of coaches usually around this time of the year. Hey, who do you know here? Who do you know there? And it's been really dry this year, which is a horrible sign. I hate the direction of college football with the fact of how it trickles down to lower level high school football recruiting. This used to be kind of a time to shine if you were Louisiana Tech or Northwestern or McNeese or even UL. And, maybe, in the case of Josh, Tulane or Houston's about to maybe get rich, or Ole Miss finds themselves another standout defensive lineman from the boot, which they've done before. But often it's a lot of talent slips through the crack. Another person who we're looking for is that Carr receiver, that transition from running back to receiver. He honestly should be in the conversation as MVP of Carr. His name is escaping me at this moment, but
Dejon Smith.
Yeah, and it's painful because I'm happy for Kyrie, hoping the best for Dejon, but it's great that he was able to catch on with the Lions. Tough, and wishing the best for a lot of these other high school students that are in the same boat.
Glad you mentioned Dejon. He's someone that one of these Southland schools has to make a move on.
He is so good. Power Fours want him.
Yeah, he's someone that I know he's having trouble finalizing a home here, but there should be some coaches knocking down the door over there in Algiers over this next month. Maybe one from right across the river right there.
Come on, how many times we had to do this in one episode?
Let's jump into, and I mean, you mentioned Dejon having his phenomenal senior season for the Cougars. Let's jump into some guys around the state at each of these classification levels who are also catching our attention at a really truly elite level, that you think that at the end of this season, when the LSWA committee and I are having some of these conversations about, all right, who were the all-state players of the year, the MVPs on offense and defense in these different classifications, let's talk about who some of these names that we're pretty sure are going to be a part of that convo here in a month plus. And let's start with the small schools and kind of build back up toward 5A. And looking at 1A, we actually, in the small schools, we have some incumbents back. And a guy in 1A who was the offensive player of the year last year is a guy that we both had a chance to see this year. We've had a chance to see a few times and hear so much about, even when we're not there on hand at Ascension Catholic games. But Chad Elzy edged a phenomenal 1A running back crew that includes obviously Harlan Berry, the LSU commit, that includes Dedrick Lasty, who has racked up insane yardage in his own right the last couple of years for Riverside Academy. And so as you look at that 1A group and the running backs kind of headline it, what's kind of your take as we are now 9 weeks into a 15-week season?
Call me a sucker, Jared, but Dedrick is the face of the Riverside team. He has been since he's been there. He is incredible. I think on this podcast, we declared him the best pound-for-pound player in the state of Louisiana. We saw Chad Elzy. He put Dat Boot back on the map. He's making it cool again in the river parishes. And he's having, again, hopefully he catches on to one of these FCS schools in the state of Louisiana. But Harlan Berry has been absolutely fantastic as a senior. I think it's, I think you sometimes you come to expect that from him, which is perfectly, I guess, okay, because he does make incredible plays on a week-to-week basis. He makes plays that he shouldn't be able to make. He's got a rare combination of both speed and also quickness. But I've always been impressed with his ability to kind of create on his own, because he does not have many blockers that are north of 200 pounds on his offensive line or on the roster in general. So I've always been impressed. Nothing more than when we saw him against Riverside back when he was a sophomore. So he's my MVP. Listen, nothing against Chad Elzy. He is a driving force of the AC offense. Same for Dedrick and Riverside, but Riverside also has a stout defense. That's a staple under the Riverside. Harlem Berry is a one-man wrecking crew. He does it at about 187 pounds. Lightning quick, having a stellar senior season. We were coming off rankings meetings at Rivals, and standing on the table for Harlem is one of the easiest things I'll ever have to do in 2024. The ability to break plays from special teams, receiving, running, whatever you want. I think he can throw the ball if you asked him to. He's an incredible football player. I think we take it for granted because of just how spectacular he is, but we should be appreciating it more.
He's been a playmaker for that defense too this year for sure. That group will be very interesting to me to watch who goes farthest in the playoffs and how much does that kind of factor in if somebody has a crazy quarterfinal game or semifinal game or even state championship game in that Division IV select bracket. Dedrick is going to have a great case in terms of some head-to-head dynamic with Harlem and some of the numbers he put up. But there's also a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of other factors there on a Friday night beyond just, an individual versus individual performance. And I think the running back group, because there's three of them there that are in such tight contention, is going to draw a lot of attention. But the other guy that I think for sure has to be mentioned is Jonathan Dartez, the quarterback of Vermilion Catholic, who is, you mentioned, one-man wrecking crew. Some of the numbers that he puts up on every single Friday night, it seems like, in terms of his passing and his rushing, where he's all of a sudden he's got 500 some odd combined yards between the two, and whatever a defense is giving him, he's taking that and burning them in whatever way that they're there to be burnt. And so a team that is undefeated again, trying to close out a third straight undefeated regular season. We'll see how they do this week and try and be the one seed in that bracket. That quarterback is going to be a curveball to the running back trio. Defensive side, honestly, I don't know nearly as many faces that I think are going to be in that conversation, but I did want to shout out a guy, Brennan Champagne at Covenant Christian. I was looking at it earlier. He's got 111 tackles right now for a team that I think is a 4 seed if the playoffs started today. And it's been a great story for those guys to rise up the ranks really quickly. A talented Lions team down there, down the bayou. And then LaMichael Callahan with 11 sacks for Kentwood, another really good 1A team that is the younger brother of a guy that we know well, Trey Palmer, a guy, obviously a very different athlete, LaMichael, with what he's doing off the edge there, but a guy that is having a hell of a season for the Roos. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts. The 1A defensive situation is a little bit less name brand in terms of some of the prospects and whatnot compared to that offense.
I think you just hit it with the perfect name brand in Trey Palmer, so I'm all on board.
Shout out to Miss Ramonda and company out there in Tangi.
They're the best.
Hopefully, this crosses their path and they get a little smile to see LaMichael mentioned on the episode. Moving up to 2A, we have another offensive player of the year incumbent in Abram Wardell, the hyper efficient quarterback for that Calvary Baptist team. 2A for years now has been a really fun quarterback conversation because Jackson Bradley, the Louisiana Tech commitment, is up there now. You have Elijah Haven, the phenomenal sophomore at Dunham. You have Eli Friend, who's been phenomenal for Isidore Newman. And so I think as much as we talk about how heavy of a running back conversation 1A is probably about to be, 2A, there's going to be some other guys in the equation, but that quarterback dynamic with all of those guys to choose from, it's going to kind of garner the headlines.
And when you talk about quarterbacks, what do we always associate as a quarterback stat? Wins and losses. Eli Friend, I love that you mentioned him. Now I thought I was going to catch you off guard when I mentioned Eli. But right now, I am leaning towards Elijah Haven. I am biased, of course, having seen the game where he engineered a fourth quarter comeback. I think, though, that when you look at Dunham, 9-0, possibly 10-0, the way that Elijah has played this year. I mean, he was dominant last year, which is why everyone in the country is paying attention to him as a sophomore. But he has been absolutely brilliant this season, continuing to make strides week to week. Remember, he is a sophomore. He is 15 years old, but he can absolutely take over the game, just like when we spoke about when we saw them beat Chad Elzy and AC earlier this season. Abram Wardell, the thing, very extremely efficient, great numbers. Look at the help he has around him, the talent around him, the running back that's in his backfield, and the guy protecting him on his blind side. When I think about Elijah Haven, I think about him being much like Derek Stingley was at Dunham so many years ago. Just he is the heart and soul of that team, and he is going to make a play when the game is on the line. And 9 weeks in a row, that's what he's done.
Again, we'll see how the playoffs go. And I don't have season stats on Elijah right now. I can tell you season stats on Abram and Jackson are both real good again. Elijah is a guy similar to what we talked about with D'Artes in 1A. He's someone that can find a way to beat you regardless of what's there. And we saw him in maybe his toughest game of the season so far and still found a way to get it done late in that game against Ascension Catholic. That Dunham team has played higher classification teams, went up to Live Oak and got a win against a 5A there. It's been a solid program this year. Got some good young talent in its own right. And Elijah is the quarterback of a team that I think ends up being the number 1 seed in that bracket right now as they roll through this undefeated season so far. And so a lot to like there for sure. Again, we'll see how it goes over these next several weeks. Do you have anybody offhand defensively in 2A before I start throwing some names out there? So a couple of Abrams teammates up there at Calvary are guys that I think are going to be interesting to watch. I know Ethan Sands on the defensive front has had a really good year, put up some big numbers. Cole Miller at linebacker.
Oh, as you said, that Miller linebacker is pretty decent. And from what we saw from him in 7-on-7, and if he's the heart and soul of that defense, I'll roll with the Millers.
He's he's got a younger brother now who's racking up so many tackles. They may split the Miller vote. I don't know if you.
Oh my gosh!
If that family goes to the Player of the Year polls, you may have half of them voting for Cole, or we call him Iggy, or half of them voting for old Cannonball Luke Miller, the 26 guy.
Between Cannonball and Iggy, I don't even know where all the votes go.
Well, just wait till Jake, the Dragon, the younger brother, still starts making some more plays at the varsity level. But those Calvary guys are interesting to me. He's not a guy that won Player of the Year last year, but he was heavily in the 3A conversation. But Tyquarius Wilson from Union Parish, an absolute tackle monster his entire high school career. The Farmers are now down in 2A, and so he's up over 100 tackles again as a senior this year, a Mississippi Valley State commit. He's got 13 tackles for loss, a few sacks. Another guy along those same lines in terms of a disruptive guy, up around the line of scrimmage, Jaden Winters, a linebacker edge rusher from Lafayette Christian, this past week broke Melvin Hill's not even 1 year old sack record for LCA. He got his 15th sack of the season, Jaden, as a senior. And so those are some guys that are really interesting to me, just knowing some of their stats week to week. I don't have numbers on a guy at Notre Dame, Jackson Casanova, but he's someone that's kind of caught my attention in some spots this season for a Pios team having a really great year. But, I know you're familiar with Tyquarius, but it's another situation that, we'll watch how the playoffs go and see how it all shakes out. But some great options already kind of rising to the forefront.
I love it.
3A is honestly the one that I have the least concept. It feels, particularly watching some of the dynamics with U High and not knowing what their postseason holds, and knowing, Keelan Moses, who felt like probably a shoe-in for that defensive player of the year going into the season. He's someone that has missed a little bit of time with some injury. And so I don't know where he is with some of that stuff right now. But do you have anybody that kind of pops off to you as you look at that 3A list of teams that catches your attention?
Yeah, I'm just looking up his name. I have a shout out. I'm not gonna let it go on. It is tough because I was gonna pluck apart the U High squad. Where's my guy?
So I guess while you pull that up, I've got a couple of Bunky teammates and Dylan Compton, the dual threat quarterback, and then our guy Kyle Johnson, who's super versatile for the Panthers. That's a team that is trying to finish its first undefeated regular season since 2003. They're ranked number 1 in Class 3A right now for the first time since 1988, according to the LSWA polls. And so a lot to like there for just the resurgence of that Bunky program, doing things that have not been done in those guys' lifetimes, and in some cases, right around our lifetime and when we were coming into the picture. Those two, I have a couple of teammates from Northwest as well. Kevon Johnson's been phenomenal as a running back for the Raiders. Uh, Davin Devon Thibodeau, the defensive end for the Northwest Raiders as well, who's been phenomenal. I believe was a district MVP last year and is someone to watch. And then, another name I wrote down, I don't know his stats at all, but I know Jennings is doing really well. And a guy that you saw as, I think, an 8th grader, and Rajon Zeno has to be
My
having a great
guy.
season right now.
There's my guy. His name. I had Rajon. I could not think of Zeno to save my life. When I visited Jennings the last time for Trevor going into his junior or senior year, Coach Rusty had told me that he thought Rajon was a combination of Travis and Trevor Etienne. I am not a brilliant person, Jarrett, but if I combine those two running styles, I fell in love immediately. Rajon is now a senior. He plays out of the backfield. He plays some safety and some defense for them. They are 8-1 with a proven playoff record when they get into the playoffs. They usually go pretty deep. This is Rajon's time. He has obviously not turned out to be the prospect that Travis or Trevor turned out to be, and most running backs in the state will never amount to the heights of those two. Those two were both extremely special in their own right. And I was the one who had Trevor ranked the highest coming out of Jennings, and I still feel pretty damn good about it. Now that he's toting the rock for Georgia at an incredible clip. But, it's for Rajon to be lifting the team to this height. I think he's been doing a little bit of everything. That's what you do at Jennings. And for him to play defense, which neither of the Etiennes did, give that man his due.
I thought you were about to go Samuel Gump there for a minute. I may not be a smart man, but I know what loving a running back is. As we get into these higher classifications, I think this is where we have that much stronger of a feel for some of these spots, and there are, just as in some of these other classifications, some great candidates already kind of popping to mind. In Class 4A, there's a couple of really good quarterbacks, but I think it's another running back led conversation for that offensive player of the year. You want to kind of take the lead on this one, and I'll chime in.
Yeah, I just think that Jasper Parker has been sensational this year. I'm wearing the Shaw green, so let's just stick with the theme. What he does out of the backfield as a runner, as a central force of I keep wanting to say Ponchatoula too, which is like it's hard because the colors also fit. But he is the center force of a Hank Tierney offense, which we actually have not said about a running back since Ponchatoula. I think it's put Shaw back to what you would expect from a Shaw Eagles football team. Jasper has been brilliant. I've been talking about Jacob Washington all year. And in doing so, not to take anything away from Jacob, because he's been great. He's a great number 2 to Jasper on that offense, giving them that vertical threat. But Jasper is the workhorse, and he has played like it. He has been physical. He has been dynamic in multiple facets of the offense. And if and when Shaw is going to make a run and try to get Hank Tierney one more before, I'm not even going to say that he hangs it up again, because I don't think he's ever going to hang it up. Just get him one more. It's going to be behind Jasper Parker. And I just think his senior season, it was a great junior season. A lot of people had an argument that he was a compelling argument that he was the best back in the state. He had a great offseason, and he's had a brilliant senior season.
That's a team that I don't know isn't already the favorite in Division II Select, but if U-High is out of the picture, the door opens that much more widely for the Eagles. If U-High ends up a low seed, you end up potentially a state championship caliber matchup earlier on in the playoffs. And so we'll be watching from the West Bank for sure what happens with U-High and where those paths might cross, because that might be a game that I need to get out to if we see it at some point prior to the Dome. Jasper, I think a great option. He's someone, I don't know his season stats, but I know he broke the single game Shaw record, and so the numbers have to be getting up there pretty high. Deshaun Ford, kind of a similar conversation for Opelousas. The reigning state champions in D2 non-select, they'll be a little bit lower of a seed this year in the playoff brackets, but again, I think someone with as great a chance as anyone to make a deep run on the non-select side. Another guy in that running back conversation, another Ford in that running back conversation, Xavier out there at Leesville is already pushing up toward 2,200 yards on the ground alone this regular season, 35 touchdowns, still has a regular season game left, still has the playoffs. This is a guy that with his ability to throw up 300 on a Friday night, we may be talking about as a 3,000-yard rusher here pretty soon. And so watching what happens with Xavier and the Wampus Cats is going to be an interesting piece of this conversation as well. Obviously, shout out some of those North Louisiana quarterbacks. Pop Houston's had a really big year for Evangel, Luke Delafield for North DeSoto. And so those guys are going to have some due. There's some other really good 4A quarterbacks and athletes as well. But those running backs really kind of topped my mind as soon as I started looking at this.
Yeah, it's when you look at the teams there, it's hard to ignore them. You talk about Ford is built Ford tough, in Leesville, in Opelousas, but I don't know, man. I think it's something about the school rush, just like Elijah when we talk about setting the Dunham mark, or the same way we talk about Arch when he did it at Newman. It just gives some perspective on just not only how great of the prospect they are, how good of a football player they are, but the kind of impact that they had in that season to also eclipse that mark.
Look, the four S's, Sam Spiegelman Select Schools. You're looking at those select school guys and giving them a little bit of the edge today. Do you have anybody on defense in 4A that
Yeah,
you
Rashad
kind of
Sterling, the stud defensive lineman from
yeah.
Lutcher. Lutcher is undefeated. Usually, when we talk about Dwayne Jenkins teams, not to take anything away from their defenses, they always have pretty playmaking ready defenses. We've seen it quite a bit, but they're always built behind their offenses, whether it's Lunch or Lowell or John Trey. The Lutcher offenses are always a kind of a staple of Dwayne Jenkins Lutcher's teams or the St. James teams. But Rashad has been absolutely brilliant as a senior. I think he's probably the defensive lineman out of Josh, out of the kid at Central. That Rashad has taken the biggest step forward. I love what I've seen from him as a senior. He's going to get a nice rankings bump in the updated rankings. The face of this Houston 2025 group, and they wanted to make a statement in the boot. They still have a chance again to capitalize and add Josh down the road, but Rashad has kind of turned into the player that we thought he would be. And if Lutcher is going to keep being undefeated, it's going to be because of Rashad Sterling, what he's doing up front to force the issue.
Another guy that I don't have his season stats, but King Shad was the first person I wrote down in 4A under the defensive subhead on my little list here. I would also be interested to know what some of the numbers look like on guys like Jonathan Ford and Corey Amos at Opelousas, Nico Blanchard at STM. Their defense has been huge for keeping them afloat while the passing game kind of found its rhythm and footing with a lot of new faces there. And so STM, after knocking off previously undefeated Turlings Catholic, is a team that is probably about to have a first round bye in the Division I select playoffs and be interesting to watch this postseason. But a couple of those Lafayette area guys certainly caught my attention. Brent Gordon Jr. for Cecilia, similar sort of deal, absolute tackle monster and really versatile defensive player and all around playmaker for the Bulldogs, a team that was in the Dome last year, just like Opelousas, a little bit lower of a seed path this year, but someone no one wants to see once the playoffs kick off. But just off vibes and having seen him once this year and the impact he had in that E.D. White game, that was such a pivotal game for two of the state's top teams. Rashad was the first person that came to mind for that.
I thought you were going to call the kid from Cecilia Tickle Monster.
Tickle Monster. in 5A. 5A, another one, got some good running backs, got some good quarterbacks, certainly. We talked about a guy in Kenny Darby who leads the state in receiving yards, and so we haven't talked a whole lot about receivers yet, but Airline's got a triplets of guys putting up absolutely prolific numbers there. When you start looking at that offensive group for 5A, who were some of the first names that popped out?
Dejon Richardson at Carr. I think he has been the spark plug for that Carr team. That
Smith, Dejon Smith.
Oh, Dejon Smith. Excuse me. I'm already getting ahead. Dejon Smith. We talk about Teron Francis as being the alpha of that receiving core, and maybe he is the most talented. But Dejon has added a whole other element to that passing attack. We're used to Carr being 3 and 4 receivers deep. That isn't the case this year. And with Teron is so much upside and is such a dynamic player, and he has been way more consistent this year. But I think part of that has been Dejon's emergence, a former running back that I think is powerful, capable at receiver. So I think he needs to be in the mix. We're not going to be looking over Ash and JT Lindsay, who's been an absolute alpha, the spark force of that Trojans offense all year round. He cannot be stopped. And in the same capacity, we talk about Harlem and Jasper, equally as dangerous in the screen game and catching passes in the flats and downfield. JT is a beast. Kenny Darby, we talked about a little bit earlier. Obviously, the ability to be a vertical threat, but his ability to contest for balls and make contested catches and play a little bit above the rim and just a little fine-tuned parts of his game that I was not familiar with. I really come. Obviously, the production speaks for itself, but the playmaking in the highlights have really caught my eye. And who else did I want to? And of course, Nate Shepard. Prior to injury, he should get some sort of like, hey, you were squarely in the mix until this. But what a sensational season for Nate. We talked about it, beating it to a drum, but yeah, I think I hit everyone.
Nate, to your point, Nate, I think had to be in this conversation prior to the injury, and we'll see how some things develop over the next month. I really feel strongly that he should still be an all-state person in general, but
He is an all-state person.
Maybe looking at a deep run from a JT or from an airline and those guys makes it tougher to be the player of the year if you start talking about Alexandria making to the Dome or something along those lines. But watching how the playoffs treat Alexandria and JT in particular, and that airline team, where I think if there's going to be a player of the year, it ends up being the quarterback, Ben Taylor. He's got Kenny up at 1,300 some odd yards. He's got Jarvis up around 900 yards. The numbers, regardless of who he's throwing to, Ben Taylor's putting up historic numbers for that airline team and for, the entire, Caddo Bossier area up there that does such a nice job keeping track of some of those multi-parish stats up there at the Shreveport, the Bossier, Caddo Bossier Times and whatnot up there for the Advocate. Both those newspapers do a good job. And Ben is a Northwestern State commit. He's had Mississippi State offering him a PWO spot. He's a guy that has completed 75% of his passes this year, up over 3,200, pushing 3,300 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. And so from a quarterback dynamic, I think he kind of leads the conversation 5A, and it'll be him and JT seeing who can, leave that final impression on a lot of the voters' minds down the stretch. And I wanted to shout out as well, Jamarcier Plater for Captain Shreve. He's up at 2,000 yards in his first season as a running back. And so a lot to really like there for what he's done for the Gators. But
Great
I think
call.
right now you look at Ben Taylor and JT Lindsay as kind of the leaders of the pack. And then on defense, some great options, man. I know you mentioned another guy at Carr that I think you crossed up his name and Dejan's name all into one. But who do you have when you look at some of the 5A options?
Well, let's go with my front runner, and that is Aiden Anding at Ruston. I just think last year he made his return back to football. The proof was in the pudding with the way he played as a junior in the state championship game. He was absolutely incredible, and the senior year he had has put him amongst not only the best corners in Louisiana, which was already, we knew he was one of them, but he was among the best cornerbacks in the country. He is so dynamic, attacking the football, playing the football with the ball in his hands. Sensational senior season, and something that you rarely get to talk about with a defensive back to be playing and having this sort of impact, and not surprising to see him do that at Ruston. Big Rich Anderson has been awesome this year. I know that the coaches up at LSU think he is a man amongst men at Carr and amongst the defensive tackles in the country for next year's class. He's well over 300 pounds, but he is strong and he moves like a bear. And I think he's just been quietly standing on business, as the kids say, as a junior, provides an interior pass rush, and he swallows blockers and makes it look easy. He is mammoth strong and quick, and I love watching Big Rich play. And then, quick shout out, Juju Burns at Neville has been also having a great season. That Neville defense is a tone setter. Not to keep saying the same thing over and over again, but if and when we see Neville in the Dome, it is going to be because of that Neville defense this year. Juju Burns is kind of the embodiment of that, much like Blaine Bradford is a Catholic, and he's been having a sensational season as well. It's also included Blaine Bradford in there. I think he's had a 5-star season as a junior last year. Obviously the injuries kept him out for so long, but when he came back in the state championships, he had that pick. And then he had such a brilliant offseason with his testing and camping. For Blaine to be that enforcer, much like Juju is for Neville, these great defenses always have whether it's a pass rusher, a linebacker, or a safety or DB that just sets the tone. And it's Juju for Neville, it's Blaine for Catholic. Also both having just sensational seasons.
The 5A Defensive Player of the Year is going to be such an interesting conversation to watch how some of these all district teams go, because I think every one of the top candidates has someone else on their own defensive unit that is among the other top candidates. Where you mentioned Aiden Anding, I think Zarek Hill might be my favorite to win this award right now. He's been phenomenal, closer to the line of scrimmage for that Bearcats defense. Both those guys just bring such different pieces to the equation, because you, on top of the defense, add in everything Aiden's done as a special teams return man, and that has to be considered here as well. And so you have two Ruston guys to consider. Which one of them ends up being a defensive MVP from the district and probably gets the nod and a little bit more favorable of a push come All-State Player of the Year voting. Big Rich has Aiden Hall and other members of that Edna Carr defense. You mentioned Blaine Bradford, Jacob Bradford's right there. You mentioned Juju Burns, Brody Watley, the TCU commit on the defensive line, as well as Jaden Reed, who's been phenomenal in the secondary for Neville. Looking forward to seeing the Tigers this week against Alexandria. And so
nice.
A lot of tandems and trios at a lot of these top seeded programs that are going to be interesting to me in particular for this Defensive Player of the Year conversation by the end of it all.
My body's black and blue just thinking about Alexandria and Neville beating up on each other.
Yeah, look, this is one I've been looking forward to for a while. Neville is a team that I really wanted to see this season. Hadn't gotten a chance in person yet, and thankful to get to wrap up the year, the regular season, doing so with the last regular season matchup of two unbeaten teams left on the slate with Neville and Alexandria.
I'm not going to be there with you on Friday, but I do want you to know it's the last game of the season, Jarrett. They won't hold anything back.
Yeah.
It's going to go down on Friday night. Let's put it that way.
No doubt. Looking forward to that one. Looking forward to seeing the playoffs ahead. We'll get the brackets on Sunday. I don't think there's a specific time set to release those, but I'm expecting them on the earlier side Sunday. And
it's the LHSA. It's going to be like 1, 2 o'clock. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I'm trying to plan a bracket reaction show live stream on Sunday, and Chance Hester and I are talking about, okay, when do we need to do this? And I'm texting people over there with LHSA Network, and I don't know when the brackets are going to drop. And so we're going to try and kind of play that somewhat by ear, but looking forward to seeing what they are once they're finalized here on Sunday, talk about some of those top matchups, talk with some folks around the state from different programs, some coaches and some kids about what they're looking forward to in their draw. And then obviously in, a month and a half, we'll be together in person again in the Caesar Superdome, watching some state championship games to wrap it all up.
And this year we're getting the Bad Bunny tickets. Okay. No, they're no putting it off. We're getting them.
Is he coming back? Bad Bunny.
He's still there, I'm told.
He just haunts the.
He's frozen in that Superdome. If you stayed in there for 365 days, you would be ice cold.
He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's a big Bad Bunny fan, in case you haven't caught wind of that. I'm just a fan of some of what we're going to see this Friday night between Alexander and Neville, as well as obviously Sunday with the playoff brackets. We're all looking forward to them. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. It was awesome getting a break from everything else going on in the world around us to talk about some of these fantastic players from all over the state and in all classifications. As always, thanks y'all for tuning in for Louisiana versus Recruit Dat Boot. Till next time, y'all be well.